FPS first-person shooter is the culmination of decades of history in one epic documentary. It brings together the most legendary creators, the most legendary games, the most legendary memories that many of you have probably had, as I have, playing these games, and takes you behind the scenes to tell stories of how they were made, how they influenced other creators who you will meet and who went on to create their own first-person shooters, and how they've touched lives of millions of people around the world. FPS games are sort of underrated in terms of the stories they can tell. I think a lot of times if players aren't being bombarded with cutscenes and walls of text, they think, well, there's no story here. But to be honest, if you think back to the beginning of Doom, which is my favorite first-person shooter of all time, that opening moment is you standing in an empty room with the corpse of a Marine several feet in front of you. Why is that significant? Because you're a Marine. So whatever is out there lurking in the darkness killed all of your friends and is coming for you. That's the story. That's the setup. And that takes us through a lot of other epic games from the 90s, such as Half-Life, that fateful tram ride that Gordon took to Black Mesa that day, to other games with more explicit storytelling and character development. What we really wanted to do was make one epic documentary that could cover as much ground as possible, so you'll really get to see the evolution of first-person shooters in terms of design, in terms of graphics, in terms of characterization, and in terms of BFG's big freaking guns, if you will, but also in terms of the creators and where they were, where technology was at the time that they made these epic games, and why they spoke to us then, now, and forever. So in my research, some of the most surprising things I learned about FPS games is how chaotic the development cycles were. And it was really cool to hear from so many different creators about how that combination of intent and chaos formed this perfect storm for how games came together. I am very excited for viewers to watch all 4+ hours of this documentary, but particularly I think they're going to be very surprised at what the first 15 minutes holds in store. There are a lot of people who, like me, were introduced to the genre through games such as typically Wolfenstein 3D or Doom. But in the first 15 or 20 minutes or so of this documentary, we're going to take you back not to the early 90s, not even to the early 80s, but the 1970s, where the FPS genre was born. It was codified later. That's what id Software did. They kind of took all these elements and codified them into what we know today as the FPS. But the early experiments with games like Maze War, The Colony, and even Battlezone, which you might not think of as an FPS, but you are in a tank, you are in first person, you are shooting, you're going to go right down, dig down to the bedrock of this genre and learn things you never knew. And even going forward, games like Doom, Quake, Duke Nukem, Half-Life, kind of the who's who of FPS games. You're going to hear some familiar stories, but from new angles, and you're going to hear stories you've never learned before. So you're in for a wild ride. I think if you haven't heard of FPS before now, or you missed our Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and you've been hesitating to pull the trigger, that's an FPS pun, you're going to want to do that, because this is really an all-in-one meal that will make you nostalgic. It will also open your eyes to how games are created and just some of the peaks and valleys, the struggles and the triumphs that these creators went through. You're going to want to be a part of this, because this is really a once-in-a-lifetime film. It is the largest cast of gaming all-stars ever captured on film. And you can be a part of this, because if you've watched this long, you know that these games are a part of you. So take the next step and get this film that crystallizes a lot of your favorite memories and stories you've never heard before, and just extends your enjoyment of FPS games from now into the future.